Hello, everybody. Today we will be introducing our group project, C.A.M.I.N.Y. It is a combination of the work from students such as myself, Yara Hindi,
Caleb Hikus, Noah Clark,
Izzy Ramos,
Morgan Meineke.
Elena Barba.
C.A.M.I.N.Y stands for Contributor of American and International Yields. Each letter represents the first initial of each creator's name, and the purpose of this technology is to sustain human life, acting as a vessel for humanity's continued lifeline as it orbits our solar system until a more permanent residence is implemented. The goal of C.A.M.I.N.Y is to discover and obtain resources from space and provide a safe and habitable environment for humans.
All right, so the key features of C.A.M.I.N.Y, my name's Elena, and the main role I'm going to have in this part of the project is construction materials and the construction of our solar panels.
My name's Caleb, and my portion will be focused on sustainability and recycling systems on board.
My name is Morgan. I'll be doing space physiology and artificial gravity.
my name's Izzy, and I'll be doing the psychological effects of space travel and virtual reality.
My name's Noah. I'll be covering language usage and communication technology.
My name is Yara, and I will be discussing the guidelines and rules for spaceship conduct.
All right, so for materials and areas chosen to be part of the construction of our spacecraft, they range from aluminum alloys to steel, multi-layer insulation, heated pipes, and docking ports along our spacecraft. All right, so on this side, we're going to be talking about the materials we chose and why we specifically chose these materials for our spacecraft's construction. So for starters, we chose aluminum alloys because they're a very common metal to use in automotive applications and even space applications. It is one of the most vital and main metals used to actually construct the International Space Station. And we also implemented this into our spacecraft's construction because it's a very strong yet lightweight metal. And not only that, but it's very flexible and durable. So if we ever run into any impacts while in space, we know we will be protected. Not only that, but we're going to also implement steel into our spacecraft's construction because it's a very strong and durable metal. Not only that, but we also have multi-layer insulation. We mainly wanted to have this incorporated into our construction because we wanted to regulate the temperatures and protect against the extreme cold and heat that we're going to experience during our space travel. Then we have heated pipes. So we have these so we can transfer excess heat away from critical systems powering the spacecraft. And not only this, we figured we could use this as an advantage and actually regulate the heat to our dock area that everyone's going to be sleeping in because we thought that's the best way to keep people warm to combat the coldness of space. And lastly, we have our docking ports. This is where our pods can attach securely and re-enter our spacecraft.
All right, and on this side, we're going to be talking about how the organization and layout of the ship is going to be like. So in our upper left corner, we're going to have our sustainability area. This is where we're going to be farming and planting our fruits and vegetables, similar to how they do that on their International Space Station. We're going to utilize their resources and their results to best figure out how we're going to adapt our own ship's vegetable and farming layout. And then not only this, but we're going to have our waste management part of this area. And not only this, but whoever's going to be working in this area is going to be partnering with me to help maintain and ensure the functioning of the solar panels along with their self-cleaning system. And then on our lower right area, we're going to have our medical area. So this is where all our people that are going to be on board the ship are going to be eligible to get any type of healthcare, mental care, anything that's needed. So we're going to have our physiological department in this area, and then we're also going to have our psychological department. This is going to be available for everybody for their use and benefit, whether it be for personal health problems, mental problems, so on and so forth, being homesick, anything that can help accommodate anybody that's going to be on board. And then in our lower right area, this is our docking and pod area. This is where we will be having our resource pods deploy and land. This is where those who will be going to asteroid mine, this is where they're going to find their spacecrafts to go and farm the resources. And then on our upper right area, that's going to be our supply and government area. So in our supply part of that area, this is where we will be storing goods farmed from the asteroids, and that's usually where we're planning on putting our metals, our metal collection and inventory, that we're going to be farming from the asteroids. And then in our government area, that's going to be mainly where we deploy our colony constitution. So in our constitution, we're planning on having exploration regulations being displayed, territorial rights for people that are on board, administration of the colony, how we're going to manage our resource management, property rights, waste management, and then so on and so forth. And then we're also going to be discussing the government areas, and also going to be an area where we're going to be discussing our funding, how we're going to go forth with getting more money to support our mission, how we will be doing that on our own. And then most importantly, we're going to be sure we're following all rules for traveling in space, to space, and having passengers aboard a spacecraft. We're going to make sure we're within all our government criteria and regulations. And in the center, we have our communication and pilot area. So that's also obviously our pilot area is where we're going to be our command center for the ship. And then also communication area is very vital, because this is our main area where we'll be having contact with Earth. We're going to be informing them of experiments we're planning on doing, updates of an experiment, results, announce new discoveries that we may find on our trips, new discoveries relating to asteroid mining, and communication with deployment pods that go asteroid mining as well. This is our main communication area. And just overall, this is how we plan on laying out the ship. And on the lower level, there's going to be like another level to this ship, and that's where we're planning on having the sleeping quarters and the living area for participants on the lower level of the spacecraft.
And that's overall how we're going to organize our spacecraft and in general for our orbital colony.
All right, so we're going to be using our pods for asteroid mining, and we're going to be using this because asteroids are very abundant in not only precious and industrial metals, but they also contain ice, water, and other elements that we can utilize to our advantage. And not only that, we plan on using the ice water that we find as our water supply for our spacecraft. And we're going to be using this for all types of water supply. So we're going to be using for like hydration, growing food, for breathable air within our spacecraft, and for radiation shielding. The water will be enabling the sustained presence of humanity in space, and we want to prove that we can maintain this. And then we're going to mine precious metals to maintain our supply. May we run into any certain inconveniences while in space. And not only that, we are also going to sell the excess industrial or precious metals to corporations and businesses in need of these materials to help with some funding. All right, so on this slide, we're going to be talking about the metals found in asteroids and their worth. So before diving into any of these metals and their worth, I did want to mention that not only are space corporations, but also businesses and regular corporations are talking about how rich and abundant that these asteroids are in all these metals, and there's a lot of profit to be made, and that eventually maybe even our economy is going to be, the asteroids will be worth more than our own economy at the moment. And there's just a lot of money to be made from farming off asteroids, not only for corporations, but just other businesses in general. So that's why we're going to use this to our advantage. We're going to use all these metals and use this to also supply our ship, but also funding. We're going to utilize the metals that we find to sell to other corporations in order to improve our funding for our own mission and to also help out those businesses in needing the materials as well. So for starters, let's go with industrial metals. So there's iron, which is worth 30 cents in US dollars per ounce. There's cobalt, which is worth 81 cents in US dollars per ounce. Nickel is worth 66 cents in US dollars per ounce. And then our platinum group metals are ruthenium, which is worth $430 in US dollars per ounce. rhodium, which is worth $14,000 in US dollars per ounce, and palladium is worth $2,500 in US dollars per ounce. Osmium is worth 400 US dollars per troy ounce. Iridium is worth 520 US dollars per ounce, and platinum is worth 1,018 US dollars per ounce.
An important aspect to consider is human physiology in space and how artificial gravity may be a solution. In space, people and objects appear weightless according to a concept typically called zero gravity. However, microgravity is a more accurate term because there is actually a very small amount of gravity in all parts of space. This very small amount of gravity is the force that keeps everything in orbit, including the moon around the Earth, Earth around the sun, and the sun at the center of our solar system. Even though this force keeps the solar system functioning properly, microgravity can have many negative effects on the human body when astronauts are exposed at long-term intervals. The gravity on Earth keeps our blood and fluids circulating throughout the body, but microgravity moves fluid from the lower extremities towards the head and brain, which not only decreases the blood circulation in the legs and feet, but may increase the amount of fluid in the brain. A study was done comparing the effects of short and long-term flights on astronauts' brains, specifically the CSF, cerebral spinal fluid, at the top of the brain and within the compartments of the brain called ventricles. The study confirmed that the brain's central sulcus narrowed and there was a shift of the brain towards the top of the skull, which decreased the CSF at the top of the brain, which may have led to an increase in the ventricles. These changes in the brain could have devastating effects due to the increased pressure in the brain and the loss of division between sensory and motor controls, which is what the central sulcus does. One disorder in particular that has been connected to these shifts of fluid in the body is SANS, Spaceflight-Associated Neuroocular Syndrome, previously called VIP, Visual Impairment Intracranial Pressure. This problem was recognized throughout the 2000s, and simply put, it is the physiological structural change of the eyes and optic nerve due to shifting of the fluid in the head. As you can see, the fluid changes in the body have very detrimental effects. Other physiological effects include bone loss due to negative calcium balance, muscle atrophy on specific muscles that require gravity, and cardiovascular deconditioning. This deconditioning causes a decrease in circulatory blood volume because the heart isn't able to work as hard, a lowered aerobic capacity because the blood that transports oxygen to the body isn't supplying it fast enough, and most prominently, orthostatic intolerance, symptoms that occur when standing due to insufficient blood volume. Artificial gravity may be the solution to counteracting these physiological effects. To apply artificial gravity in space, a force that produces the same acceleration as the force on Earth must be applied to the astronauts. Centrifugal force is an outward force on a rotating object or body. Acceleration is the rate of change in velocity. Together, they depend on the radius of the circular path and the speed of the object. The smaller the radius and the faster the speed or velocity, the greater the centrifugal force. You can feel this force, for example, when you turn in your car and get pushed into the door, or when you turn quickly on a roller coaster. The goal of a project like this is to create an environment similar to Earth to make long-term missions, possible colonization, more likely and less harmful on the human body. This would also give astronauts a more homey feel. And to do this, we would need to use centrifugal force and apply it to a spacecraft. As for the structure of the artificial gravity systems, there have been a few ideas proposed since it hasn't actually been done yet. The first is the O'Neill cylinders, as you can see on the bottom right here. It's a whole spacecraft made of these cylinders that basically rotate opposites and create the artificial gravity effect, but they're very large, use lots of materials, and are very expensive. Another idea would be on the bottom right here, or bottom left, sorry, individual rotating systems in specific rooms of a spacecraft. So as you can see, this astronaut would lay down and be spun very quickly. It doesn't really seem like they could be very productive using artificial gravity, which is kind of the purpose here. The last would be the non-rotating platform on the top here. It's something that NASA is currently working on and it could be the most feasible, cost-efficient, and quickest way to implement artificial gravity in space. The design is very simple, which makes it less expensive than some of the other options. As seen on the slide here, there would be a non-rotating platform with rotating modules underneath it to create the force needed to mimic Earth's gravity. The flat platform is a perfect way for other ships, pods, and whatever else to land on it, much easier than trying to land on a spinning surface. It also makes for mass balancing simpler than trying to do it on a spinning ship. The modules here I'll talk about in the next slide as for what specifically they would house. But also just in general, the resources for this kind of system it takes a lot less than like a large spacecraft like the O'Neills and would be more cost efficient because it would require less materials. Overall, the design simplifies most aspects that need to be considered when creating a spacecraft with artificial gravity, and this is why we will be implementing this idea in our spacecraft. For the design incorporation, most of the community areas will still be zero or microgravity, just because you can't really have the whole thing spinning, or at least in our idea, it's not going to be spinning. The modules underneath that will be spinning to generate the artificial gravity will house certain rooms that require gravity. Medical areas, the psychological unit, physiological unit, sleeping quarters, exercise, and maybe some lounge rooms could all be a part of this rotating modules underneath that create the artificial gravity and that you could step into to have this gravity effects, but also go back and still be functioning on a spacecraft together, like in this communal area that would still have the microgravity, but could be changed in the future as we come up with better solutions and how to make a larger yet cost-efficient spacecraft for artificial gravity. For a quick overview of the cost and funding, obviously funding presents the biggest issue. Costs include materials, launching, and labor. Elena has gone over some of the materials we would need. Launching varies per company, and labor, it kind of will depend, but the median NASA engineer total pay is $91,000 to $145,000 per year. This would kind of depend on if we work with NASA or if we outsource and whatnot. We could also use private companies to support some designs. NASA may want to support and work with us. We could also get sponsors and just anyone who wants to get their name out there that would want to help provide the cost and funding for this project.
All right, so on this slide, we're going to be talking about how we're going to be utilizing the solar panels along our spacecraft. So for starters, we're going to be using them surrounding the entire spacecraft. We decided to do this because we wanted it to be a very natural but sustainable energy source rather than using fuel. And it will be pricey, but it's going to benefit us in the long run because it's going to be very efficient energy source for us in terms of our long course that we're planning on doing, since we won't have to go back for refueling. And then in general, what gave us this idea is that it's going to be a very sustainable energy source. And if it's possible for rovers and satellites, we're going to eventually make it possible for a spacecraft to run solely on solar panels. All right, so on this slide, we're going to be talking about why it's important to keep solar panels clean. So for starters, it reduces energy costs by a lot of money by keeping them very clean. Solar panels are a very simple structure that just needs to be simply maintained and routinely cleaned so they stay operating at their maximum efficiency. And just by not cleaning them, you're affecting the amount of energy you can get out of a solar panel. So why let it get to its minimum efficiency when you can have it at its maximum efficiency and it's going to be working best for you, and it'll even benefit the life of the solar panel by keeping it well maintained throughout its life. So the energy generated in a solar panel depends on the absorption of sunlight. Therefore, the buildup of dirt can begin to limit the amount of sunlight the panels are exposed to. And by cleaning the solar panels, you can keep them operating at their maximum efficiency and even prolong the lifespan, which is going to overall benefit us in the long run because we're going to be using this instead of fuel as our main energy source to keep our spacecraft in space.
Can we use space junk to fuel and support ourselves in space? Space nets can be used to collect debris in the way of the ship, as well as around the Earth, and collect smaller asteroids for collection of resources. Systems used on the ISS will also be used on our ship, along with the U-Byte system from SAU. The carbon recycled and taken from the U-Byte system will be recycled, again, from all of the waste and be given to the plants on board, creating a small carbon cycle on our ship. This debris comes from junk satellites, which is anything in near-Earth orbit, or NEO, that's man-made and it has lost any and all purpose. Of the 56,450 tracked objects sent into space, only 28,160 remain. Only around 4,000 of those are operational today. The total mass in space, that's from humans, is around 9,300 tons. All of this waste and debris has continued to plague our near-Earth orbit and can be used and recycled for future projects, as well as maybe even finding some outside of near-Earth orbit as it has floated away due to the lack of gravity. With all this trash in near-Earth orbit, as well as maybe even in space, not in near-Earth orbit, and other smaller asteroids, being proactive and capturing as much of it as possible, both debris and our asteroids, is necessary, not only to get out of the way so we don't get trapped on Earth, but as well as fueling and funding the recycling program on board of our ship. A fleet of nets, both for Earth's purposes and our ship's purposes, would be able to utilize all of the resources in space, including finding debris, other debris, and asteroids in space. Needed for this project are rockets, navigational systems, net propulsion systems, high tensile nets, and controllable magnets to open and close them. Using chemical reactions like nitric oxide with computer is inside the main chassis of each net, with 3 cameras in the craft so they can be remotely piloted. Outer pouches will store the net in the chain that attaches it to the craft. Using smaller servos, the net is released and extends. Because of the lack of gravity, we don't need to use actual propulsion. Just letting it go and pushing it slightly towards the target will make sure it gets there. The net will encapsulate the target, whether it be debris or an asteroid. And once the target is secure, descent to Earth or the home craft will begin. For the nets and the space nets, per net, not including multiple packages being sent into space at once, would cost around $66 million per thing. It's broken down here, and with the rockets itself, it would cost about $1 million. The chassis and everything included in the physical structure would cost around 10 grand. All of the onboard computing and the cameras would approximately be $10 million. And the assembly and testing budget would be around $5 million. The launches are the biggest part, and like I said, if we combine more than one net in each launch, like we can save, and that'll cost around $50 million per thing. We'll get all of our funding from various investors, nonprofits, and fundraising, and hopefully people will volunteer to come onto the ship.
Space travel on the Mind. Of course, it is no surprise that there would be some type of side effects to this type of mission, to any type of space mission that is. Usually throughout the transition of just being in the spaceship itself, astronauts have been prone to essentially get these different symptoms like transit anxiety, emotional liability, depression, appetite loss, severe sleep deprivation, and development of asphyxiation. This this condition is typically experienced by astronauts after they've returned from their missions, essentially. And pretty much what it entails is symptoms of fatigue, irritability, lack of appetite, and sleep disorders. Essentially, the points below I have provided why the use of virtual reality pods could be so essential to the transition from Earth to space for the passengers. That given, these points are essentially what helped me to build my creation, or at least my idea or contribution to the ship. These pods can help avoid or alleviate mental emotional distress. Of course, we cannot completely eliminate them, but it is better than nothing. Kind of this idea of, instead of them having to kind of go cold turkey, they would be able to use this device to kind of help them in a way. And through this machine, it will regulate body levels and temperatures as there may be distressing situations or the passenger may be feeling a bit on edge, it will be able to kind of help them considering what they may or may not be experiencing in that moment. This will also provide an immersive virtual reality environment to support the adaptivity. So, with that said, I know that probably being on this spaceship of basically just metal, it could be hard for somebody to feel normal or just kind of be able to do their day-to-day routines. And so these VR pods will be able to help them transition. So with that said, they'll be able to, go somewhere on Earth or be around people that they used to see or be able to do the things that they used to do when they were on Earth. So what will be incorporated? According to the sources that I was able to kind of find, some commonly used virtual reality factors are the 360 motion tracking for a more natural interaction. That means, the user can do things and it will feel real, or at least as real as possible. There will be an addition of haptic feedback systems. This will provide a tactical corresponding components. So being able to have those interactions in a way, those real life touches and feelings, sensations that we may not be able to get unless we were on Earth, but it will simulate something similar, if not exact, to it. The biometric monitoring tracks data to physiological responses of virtual reality. So basically, these data will kind of help us with evaluators to kind of see how the passengers are doing and how the virtual reality may or may not be helping them. In addition, the collaborative training programs where others within their pods can interact with others. Like I mentioned earlier, there will be a lot of factors, a lot of moving parts that will allow you to experience a semi-real simulation of what you would want to do. The addition of the collaborative training programs is essentially to help the passengers connect in a way that is more natural, that is more, I guess, relatable to them and what they were experiencing once on Earth. So whether that be sports or going for a walk, things like that, should really help the transition for all passengers, especially within themselves, as they will need to be able to become a community in a sense. And of course, additionally to all of this, we will have customizable settings. You'll be able to adjust the levels and other aspects of the system, such as the program and what you're immersed in. So the environment that you choose to be in, the daytime or whether it be night. So all these things will be customizable, of course, to your liking to help those transitions. Following my next motion, on average, according to the different inventory resources that I was able to find and kind of being able to piece them all together, manufacturing and laboring would be roughly around 25 to 50,000, depending on what company you decide to go with, and essentially how many people we will need to make this happen, of course. In addition to this, inventory necessary, so all the parts, all the different machineries that we may need to create these things, roughly about $100,000 to $1 million, depending on the quality of the product we decide to go forward with. So essentially, moving on from the psychological unit itself and branching out into a more day-to-day, realistic kind of transition, the initial purpose for these, from what my original goal was I had was simply being able to allow the passengers a lifestyle choice, if you will. The third point provided was what I used to be able to map out the end goal for this product. So essentially, these virtual reality bands, the incorporation of these bands assists the passengers in their day-to-day routines. This helps from them stay regulated, and the passengers may live within the world as they want to, as they prefer. Research has tried many effects to space travel, such as loneliness, depression. Of course, we may not be able to bring everyone on this ship, but if the passengers choose to live in a world of bright colors and such, they should have this choice. And a point that was brought up to me in my initial assignment was this this factor of how can we avoid passengers from getting addicted to things like this. And essentially, the passenger would not be living in a fake world. The passenger is basically able to put a filter, in a sense, on the ship. What they will see everything exactly for what it is in real time. There will not be any environmental VR settings. It'll simply be the setting of the ship, but how they choose to view the ship. So, if they wanted to have more bright colors, or essentially different, just having a different additions to how they perceive their life, should help them with transitioning, as I'm sure kind of going cold turkey for something like this will cause a lot of chaos, especially when we are trying to build a community. Everyone will still be able to interact with each other in real time and really be able to have those real life interactions, opposed to the VR pods. Everyone will be able to see things how they want to see things. And this should help them feel a little bit more at home, a little bit more comfortable. And I believe this could really help the dynamic of day-to-day routines, as I'm sure it's going to be hard for many of the passengers. So just as we touched on when we were reviewing the VR pods, what will these bands entail? What will come with these bands? Essentially, we can expect to see display technology, high-resolution display, OLED or micro LED panels, to be able to kind of project these different filters and things for the passengers' optics. Quality lens are essential for this for focusing the display properly. So this will allow the passengers to actually get a real feel. This will feel very much like a actual experience, like it is actually happening. Power and processing. These glasses require potential processors and graphic cards to ensure a well-immersed experience. So these type of programmings and these incorporations will keep the transition smooth, essentially. Making sure that it is the best that it can be, so that it can do its proper and initial job. Tracking systems. The headset should be able to track the user's head movements. So with that said, if the user is looking to the left or looking to the right, it will follow, and there won't be any glitches or anything like that. But just a very high-tech tracking system will be really essential to something like this. Additionally and finally, software ecosystem. This will allow a variety and give the user an option for the adjustable settings. So it'll give the user more of a choice, more of an idea of what they can do. And so that was my idea for these bands. In accordance to these different things that we want to bring in and we want to involve, there's the cost. So for estimated cost, manufacturing, we're looking at about $50 to $200 per unit. For design and engineering, we're looking at about $50,000 to $500,000. And for the inventory necessary, so the many little parts and pieces we will need, about $300 to $1,000. Overall, each unit will be about anywhere from $600 to $2,500, depending on the quality of the products and the different things that we decide to use for said product. And for the final consensus of this portion of the project, It is no surprise that space travel can offer such psychological effects. Just as anything else, these are things that we can already assume, and for that we can prepare for them the proper way. A psychiatric unit would flourish best if these VR pods were incorporated. These pods, designed to create a familiar environment and simulation, it will provide a comforting space for passengers as they adjust to the trip's effects. Given that as they do become better, or given that they do transition sooner than others, then we are able to start kind of leaning them off of those things and teaching them and training them on how to move accordingly within the ship. Additionally, the VR bands should be incorporated to keep this treatment balanced and consistent during the transition, as each passenger will not have a pod, individual pod in their living quarters. These VR bands will allow them to kind of stay regulated and be able to do productive things on their day-to-day lives in a position to them just being in a pod for a majority of the day and not actually getting anything physically done. The funding could be raised through sponsorships. A lot of the companies, the spaceship companies that build the parts, I find that a corporation of just like sponsorships could really help both parties. Funding, of course, for our project, and advertisement to others on Earth, or just a more mutual relationship in a sense here. And that is what my project entails. This idea that the incorporation of VR to help transition passengers, as we aren't going to be able to bring everybody on ship. We aren't going to be able to have all the things that Earth has to offer. And I know sometimes those types of factors can play a very big part in a person's transitions and in the way a person operates, even under the circumstances that we're under for this project.
My colleague Izzy discussed the psychology of a human being in space, and their psyche at the time. So it's also important to address the psychology of a uniform code of rulings. In this case, it's also important that we address the prior rules and regulations regarding international space law. These rulings include the UNOOSA, which is an outer space treaty, the commercial space legislation, licensing and authorization, environmental regulations, and international cooperation. The UNOOSA Outer Space Treaty regards a collaboration of different state entities, different countries, and ensuring that space is an environmentally safe space, and that everyone is in collaborative effort to advance the space exploration project. Licensing and authorization regards what it would take to get our spaceship, our spacecraft into space, including the blast off. Environmental regulations includes things such as space waste and how to go about that in a more sustainable manner. International cooperation, of course, regards the ruling of other nations' satellites and other nations' presence in space and taking that all into consideration. Not only is it important to address and recognize international space rules and regulations and US space rules and regulations, but it is also important to address how conduct will take place on our own spacecraft, given that there's going to be a bunch of people on one ship, and that we are all supposed to function together as a society. And in order to function together as a society, we have to have some kind of code or principles to follow. So we developed a constitution, the colony constitution. First, it's space exploration regulations. We also call this STAR law. Territorial rights and responsibilities, administration of colony, resource management, legal framework, assignment of property rights, and waste management are all conducts and codes that will be addressed. Once again, this stands for STAR law. Code 1 regards space exploration regulations. So safety regulations must be followed. The colonists should ensure that any hazard is reported to safety officers. People should avoid damaging celestial bodies during exploration, extraction activities, and strict waste management protocols which will be enforced. The colonists should also collaborate on research, open communication, and cooperation about findings just to further enhance our space exploration and to further enhance our collaboration with one another. Again, we have to adhere to U.S. space law as well as international space law. And developing emergency plans in the event of disasters during space exploration. The second code regards territorial rights and responsibilities. First, living quarters should be based on family size, rules for conduct of living quarters, and maintenance upkeep. The assigned laboratories and research facilities with restricted access to those who are staffed in those areas. Common areas must be kept clean and have fair access for all colonists. Agricultural and food production areas should also be accessible to all colonists. Intra-colony transportation access to all colonists, and emergency zones, shelters, medical facilities, and evacuation procedures should be put in place yet again to ensure the safety of the colonists. These are all to ensure safety conducts and regulations are being followed and to make sure that the humans on board are safe. Code 3 is the administration of the colony. This regards legal conduct of how the colony will address certain civil issues or certain voting matters. So a judicial branch will be established and subject to change, re-election after the completion of a 3-year term with a popular vote for 6 members who will be hearing the colonist cases and helping enforce the rules. I must also add that these ideas are kind of branched off of our constitution and also with our own local government being implemented. So I'm not necessarily reinventing the wheel. I'm just taking what other people have already established. Star law can be subject to changes with the majority of the colonists coming to agreement of what is being proposed, with a 4/6 agreement for the proposed law. The public must be heard during a public comment section of weekly meetings, and the colonists must play a role in their community. International diplomatic relations team on board to conduct communication with international space operation. Code 4 of the Constitution regards resource management, and this has been touched upon earlier within this PowerPoint. Resource management regards rationing, recycling, and implementing renewable energy resources. Resource Allocation Committee consists of scientists and engineers who will be community representatives. Members will be tasked with maintaining resources inventory. Rationing size will vary based on population size and resource availability with daily quotas for supplies. The emergency protocol is developed for resource shortages, and it is also incredibly crucial to educate colonists about resource and rationing measures through required training programs and community gatherings, including penalties for not following guidelines to further ensure that resource management is being enforced. Code 5 establishes the legal framework of our colony. The judicial system is meant to address the disputes of the colonists. Colonists are able to represent themselves or seek representation from legal counsel. Cooperative government that ensures that the needs of all residents are being met and the community is working together to establish sustainability. Code 6 of the Constitution regards assignment of property rights. Property rights should be based on the needs and equally distributed to make sure all colonists have fair and equal access to resources. The system tracking of resource management of each colony and tracking of their own property. The common areas and facilities are equally shared. The colonists may be heard by judicial branch to dispute any property rights. Management of property maintenance and upkeep will be enforced. Code 7 regards waste management. Our colony should have a segregation of waste, recycling programs, composting organic waste, storage and disposal of hazardous waste, monitoring and reporting waste, training and education on waste, and minimizing waste generation. The funding for Star Law would roughly cost $500,000 per year for the salaries of the judicial representatives collectively. A legal team salaries of Star Legal Counsel is $320,000 per year collectively. Legal counsel salary of law firm that helped start up the project would be about $1,000, leaving the total to be $821,000. This funding could probably come from plenty of space grants, such as the American Spaces Grant Funding of 2024, and they are giving out an estimated $30,000. There's also ROSES 2024, which is the Research Opportunities in Space and Earth Science. We could also do crowdfunding, contracting with NASA, connecting to a government entity. Another one of our options is we plan on selling data found on the ship back to the companies and also resource extraction. The legal team could also be sourced by a government agency within the US.
So our plan for communication and language usage aboard the C.A.M.I.N.Y reflects very similarly to the general idea that is for a large population on Earth. Granted, the creators ourselves speak a couple different languages, such as English, Spanish, Arabic, and I know some of us know a little bit of German. So likewise, we want to take into account of the various different languages that could be spoken and how communication could be handled between the people working on the C.A.M.I.N.Y and back to, say, Earth. There are many problems trying to choose a real-life language, as there are histories behind them. So it'd be a better idea to create a conlang, which is what I will cover here soon. Firstly, we have to discuss what a conlang is. A conlang is short for constructed language. There are many types of constructed languages, but the one that would be most likely needed for an international communication is known as an IAL, or an International Auxiliary Language. There have been many previous attempts, one of the most notable being Esperanto, created by L.L. Zamenhof. For this project, C.A.M.I.N.Y, the conlang would be known as Earthspeak. Earthspeak, the Earth Pigeon. In a short summary, Earthspeak is the large idea of the basic communication for astronauts and cosmonauts to speak to each other from different stations back to Earth, receiving data back and forth, and the like. Again, many attempts have been made to make languages, but they haven't always gone too well. So, in order to allow someone to learn it more quickly, not only does Earthspeak need to be simpler, such as a smaller vocabulary, but it needs to share a more basic sense of grammar and phonology that other people will be able to pick up easier without having too much variation, causing for a miscommunication or difficulty in learning. The phonetics and the phonology of Earthspeak would be decently small. We could start off with our stops, starting with the bilabial, just the lips, being pa and ba, both represented by the letter P, as to not have a variation, which I will get into. Our alveolar, which is further back in the mouth, the ta and da, as it presents in English. And even further back, our velar stops of ka and ga. For our fricatives, these are not complete stops. They allow air to escape through the mouth a little bit, such as fa and va. Very common one, tha, represented by th. sa, and za, as well as sha and ja, represented by sh and zh respectively. Of course, sh is a common one in English, but zh not so much, but it gets the idea down of the voicing or the vibration of the vocal cords. And of course, our very back ha. For our nasals, so these are sounds that escape the nose, not the mouth. It'd be ma, na, and represented, of course, by the ng, again, common in English, as well as our approximates, or consonants that are not quite vowels, not quite consonants. These would be ra, la, ya, and wa. Again, this is a smaller phonology, trying to make a more comprehensive language and a language easier to learn. As far as vowels go, we're going to go by a pretty common 5-vowel, the a, e, o, u vowel system. Even though not all languages have all 5 vowels, some languages have a lot more, like English has anywhere up to 16, while Arabic, for example, only has 3. As far as phonological variation goes, or the different ways in which similar sounds can change without being phonemic, they can, or in other words, they don't change the meaning, like the difference between pat or pat or pat. There's no real difference in English, it's just slight aspiration, while in some languages it is. So in Earth speak, some of these sounds that would not be phonemic would be the difference between pa and ba. And I did this for the large amount of Arabic speakers that are in other languages that do not have the pa sound, or some languages don't have ba, but they only have the other one. Similarly, will be no distinction between ra and ra. Again, trying to make it simpler to learn for somebody, such as an English speaker myself who had to learn Spanish. It was not the easiest to learn ra. Also not having a distinction between la, fla, and o. Again, the difference between the various different L sounds in languages that are common. And no real distinction between the ha, and ha. This also took inspiration from Arabic along with other languages such as German and Spanish, of not having a distinction in Earthspeak at the very least. Grammar does too need to be simpler, such as the syntax and morphology, or the way that sentences and words are structured. The Earthspeak will be a commonly used SVO, or subject verb object word order. Like many other pidgins, it won't have a very complex grammar, so the verbs will not conjugate outside of a simple tense change between the present, which will also be the infinitive, a past tense, a future tense, and an imperative that will double function as a subjunctive. Imperatives are commands, and subjunctives are more the if type phrases, and they will only change by a singular letter. So for an example, we have dorme, which would be to sleep, as well as the presence. So I sleep is just dorme. The past tense being dormi. The future being dormu. And an imperative, so a command or subjunctive, a possibility being dorma. There are additionally 2 suffixes to clarify origin, and this is due to Earthspeak trying not to have exonyms, as it makes it easier for everybody just to call themselves where they're from and what language they speak. And these suffixes will be speak for language and berne for someone's origin. So I would be in Earth speak and Espanol speak, American Baron. Slightly already, but the writing would mainly be taken in the Latin script, although due to its simple phonology, we could write it in other scripts, such as the Arabic script. Brief over a sample vocabulary, although in the report it will go in a lot more depth. But you can have, starting off with the pronouns here on the right hand side, We have the first person singular, yo, which is I, the plural, we, for we, second person singular, tu, for you, and the plural, y'all, like the English y'all, a third person singular, et, taking inspiration from the English word it, and of course the plural, thee, taken from Older English, they. As far as some sample verbs go, we have vive, live, veve, drink, vole, fly, taque, mine, and inata, to be born with. Some other words like prepositions would be if, o, or, a, to, a, and, in or on, all, con, with, and the, of. Of course, all is not a preposition, but put it in the same list because it did not fit into the other categories given in the sample here. Some space-related vocab, or its own word, spats-vocab, could be strela, star, planeta, planet, alien, alien, daden, mine, minerals, minerals, litho, stone, gaso, gas, helium, helium, and oxygen, oxygen. Some Earth-related vocab could be guerre, war, human, human, auto, vehicle. So, for example, you could have a spazauto or a terrauto, and caminha, which is the name of our project. It is a path, a road, or a way. Outside of a conlang, there are other aspects of communication that the caminha will need, such as some state-of-the-art technology for some short and long-range communication going again back to Earth and also in between the people on the Caminha. There'll be a few different companies. The primary ones and with their products would be Eurosat, AMSat, and Motorola. For using Eurosat and AMSat, it is because they are easily some of the top two biggest satellite companies on Earth, and they both would probably be eager to get their names into deep space. They could supply Caminha with satellites on board and satellites back in Earth's lower Earth orbit or other parts of the atmosphere that would allow for this long-range communication. I did want to briefly talk about some funding on this part as well, being that because they do want to get their names far enough into space, or to be the first ones to do so especially, they would likely be willing to help financially, maybe even give it for free. Company I wanted to talk about is Motorola. Motorola is well known here on Earth for their high quality phones, but they also make long range radios for police that could be used for a space crew both on and off the ship. A Motorola P25 APX specifically is defined by diverseelectronics.com as a two-way radio series that has features to suit needs to each user at every departmental level. Now, of course, this is typically talking about police, but as we know, there are many different levels. There are more investigatory, more on the fields, more in a home base, and we could use that type of differentiation in technology for the Caminha project. Motorola could also build an intercom system similar to what is known by the ClearCom communication system, which is already in use in a lot of workplaces and school buildings. And lastly, again, I wanted to talk about funding. Motorola would likely want to be the first one to get their name in the space as a phone company, as they were also the first phone company. And it would be a large aspiration for them to be not just the first phone company on Earth, but the first phone company in space.
C.A.M.I.N.Y requires a large amount of expenses for all of our new technologies. Technologies such as the construction materials and solar panels, space physiology and artificial gravity, sustainability and recycling systems, psychological effects of space and virtual reality, guidelines and rules for spaceship conduct, and language usage and communication technology all add to the amount of roughly 51 million and a possible additional 4 billion from communication alone. Thank you for your time, and we hope you consider C.A.M.I.N.Y as a good space exploration investment. Here's a combination of all of our website link sources.